Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I've always trusted patterns. Perhaps it came from years working in risk analysis, where my job was to find the single, discordant note in a symphony of data. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe I just knew how to listen to the silence between words. The fact is, I started to feel the shift in Lena long before I understood what it was. It wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was more like the slow, creeping formation of a fracture in glass. Invisible at first, then a faint line you can only see when the light hits it just right. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It began with her phone. For years, it had been a shared object, left on the kitchen counter, on the nightstand, its screen open to the world. Then, one day, it started living its life face down. A small, defensive gesture. Then came the password, a 6-digit wall that had never existed between us. She claimed it was a new company policy for security. I didn't question it, not out loud. The changes were subtle, and that's what made them so unsettling. Small absences at agreed-upon times, vague excuses about last-minute meetings, the notification sounds on her phone that she would silence with a forced, almost theatrical calmness. I watched, and I listened, and I said nothing. I learned a long time ago that talking too much gives a warning. It alerts the other player that you're aware of the game, and I wanted to see how far this game would go. The first time Lena came home late, smelling of the city air long after sunset, she explained it was a presentation that got pushed to the end of the day. Her words were a little too rehearsed. The second time, she said her boss, Preston, had called an emergency team meeting. She used to talk about Preston all the time. Preston this, Preston that. He was brilliant, demanding, a visionary. His name was a constant refrain in the stories of her day. Now, she seemed to avoid his name, as if saying it might cause her to slip. After the third time, she stopped explaining altogether. She would just send a short, almost automatic text message. Running late. Don't wait up for dinner. My intuition, that old, familiar engine of analysis, was already signaling a red alert. But intuition without data is just paranoia. So I started collecting data. I began making mental notes. I compared the time she said she left the office with the time her car actually pulled into the driveway. The discrepancy was usually small. 20 minutes here. 35 there. Just enough to be strange, but not enough to be proof. I checked our joint credit card statements, scanning for the anomaly, the outlier, a hotel charge, a dinner for two at a place we'd never been. Nothing. Everything was too clean, too perfect. It was a lie constructed not with clumsy fabrications, but with the careful omission of truth. One night, while Lena slept, I woke up. The moonlight cut a silver line across the room, illuminating her face. I just watched her, searching for traces of the woman I had married. I tried to find, in the peaceful rhythm of her breathing, something that still connected me to that image of trust we had built. But she seemed absent. It wasn't an explicit coldness. It was a silent distance. Her body was there, beside me in our bed, but her soul felt like it was in another room, occupied with another reality. That feeling, it hollowed me out from the inside. And at the same time, it fueled something else. A cold, quiet resolve, a mix of sadness, helplessness, and a rising tide of indignation. I couldn't live in the space between knowing and not knowing. I needed the truth, even if it broke me. That's when I decided to seek help, not from a friend or a family member. I needed a professional, someone who navigated these murky waters for a living. A colleague recommended a discreet detective, a man experienced in marital cases. Our first meeting was in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop downtown. I got straight to the point. I don't have proof, I told him, my voice steady. Just suspicions, a collection of small things that don't add up. I handed him a copy of our latest bank statements, pointing out the days that felt wrong. I highlighted the patterns I found suspicious, the late nights, the sudden lack of communication. The detective, a man named Miller, listened silently. He took notes in a small, black book, without promising quick results or easy answers. He was all business. As I left that coffee shop, I knew this wouldn't be resolved overnight. This wasn't a wound that could be fixed with a simple bandage. What I wanted, above all else, was the truth. The raw, unvarnished, and potentially devastating truth, because the lie was already killing me slowly. Chapter 2, The Fog of Evidence. The weeks that followed were an exercise in controlled anxiety. At home, I maintained a facade of normalcy. I kept our same habits. I asked about her day. I even forced myself to smile when she told stories about work. Stories that became increasingly scarce and vague. She had built a wall around her professional life, and I was on the outside of it. The most telling detail was the silence where Preston's name used to be. Before, she used to mention him constantly, his challenging feedback, his praise on a project, a funny thing he said in a meeting. He was a character in the story of her life. Now, he was gone. A ghost. She seemed to consciously navigate around him, as if afraid of speaking him into existence in our home. It was this kind of detail that I noticed. What would be invisible to anyone else was a blaring alarm to me. I waited for Miller's call like a man waiting for a verdict. When he finally called to schedule a follow-up, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of clarity. We met at the same coffee shop. He slid a thin manila envelope across the table. It felt surprisingly light. I opened it with contained anxiety, but the report was practically blank. Nothing. No incriminating photos. No captured text messages. No unusual trail. Miller's surveillance notes were a log of mundane routine. He had followed Lena on different days, at different times. 8:45 a.m. Subject: Lena arrives at Sterling Corp Tower. 12:30 p.m. Subject eats lunch at her desk, visible from across the street. 6:45 p.m. Subject exits Sterling Corp, enters her vehicle, and drives directly home. No stops at hotels. No secret meetings in cafes. Just the predictable rhythm of a corporate employee. I looked up at Miller, my frustration evident. This is it? Nothing? He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes calm and assessing. She's clean on the outside, he said. Or she's incredibly careful. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. Julian, in my experience, when there are no external signs, no hotel bills, no secret dinners, but the suspicion is this strong, it usually means one thing. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. If there's something going on, it's happening inside the company. He tapped a finger on the surveillance photo of the gleaming, glass and steel skyscraper where Lena worked, maybe even in his office. That phrase hit me like a key turning inside a safe. That was it. The betrayal, if it existed, was happening in a shielded, protected place. A place where cameras were internal, where access was restricted by key cards, where a late meeting was a perfect and impenetrable alibi. Preston's office. I knew, in that instant, that if Lena and Preston had something going on, I would never catch it from the outside. Miller could follow her for a year and find nothing. The fortress was too strong. Frustration gave way to a cold, hard clarity. There was only one way to get inside that fortress. I had to wait for someone on the inside to open the door. And for that, I would need her to talk. I would need to be patient. I couldn't push or accuse. Accusations without proof would only make her build her defenses higher. I needed to create an environment of trust. An environment where she felt safe enough to tell the truth on her own. It wouldn't be simple. It would be a delicate, psychological game. But if there was one thing I had learned over the years, it was that to unmask a well-constructed lie, you first had to let it feel comfortable. You had to let it believe it was safe. I paid Miller for his time and walked out into the city noise. I wasn't defeated. I was armed. I had a new direction. I stopped asking questions. I stopped looking for external clues. I started observing her more closely. Her eyes, her restrained gestures, her phone, always turned over on the table, like a sleeping guard. And I began to prepare. I started planning something she would never, ever suspect. If the truth needed a push, I would give it the right push, at the right time. The game was about to turn. But she had no idea she was even playing. My new strategy was a paradox. To get to the truth, I had to construct a lie of my own. A lie so convincing, so perfectly tailored, that it would make her truth feel safe enough to come out into the open. I understood the mechanics of guilt. A secret is a heavy burden. People don't confess because they are cornered. They confess because they are tired of carrying the weight. They confess when they feel they will be understood. So, I decided the best way to get the truth out of Lena was to make her believe we were on the same level. She needed to feel that I, too, had a burden. That I was hiding something. Only then, in a moment of perceived shared vulnerability, would she feel comfortable enough to let go of what she'd been holding onto for so long. She carried this secret, and that kind of burden makes you stumble. Sooner or later, everyone stumbles. I was just going to put her in front of the perfect trap. I started subtly. I began pretending to be more distracted, more absent. I stopped asking where she was going or when she'd be back. When she said she'd be late, I would react with disinterest, a simple, okay, without looking up from my laptop. I showed less jealousy, less demand. I acted like someone who had grown tired of fighting a losing battle, like someone who had already started to emotionally check out of the marriage. It was all calculated, a slow, methodical campaign of emotional retreat. And it worked. Gradually, she relaxed around me. The tension that had been a constant presence between us began to dissipate. I could see it in the way she moved, the way she spoke. She started to believe that I no longer suspected anything, that I had simply accepted our new, distant reality. But inside, I was planning every step. My first move was buying a small audio recorder. A tiny, digital device, no bigger than my thumb. It was a cold piece of metal that felt heavy with purpose in my hand. It was my insurance policy, my unbiased witness. Next, I needed to build my story. The lie. I rehearsed several ways to lead the conversation in my mind. Nothing that sounded forced or theatrical. It had to feel real, raw, and reluctant. And for that, I decided to use a simple yet effective idea. Pretend I was interested in another woman. It had to be someone close, someone Lena knew, or at least knew of, someone that made sense. I thought of a few names from my office. And then I settled on the perfect one, Cora, my assistant at work. She was young, efficient, and friendly. Lena had met her a few times at company holiday parties. I remembered, with crystal clarity, a few comments Lena had made about her. She seems a little too eager to help you, doesn't she? That was a nice dress Cora was wearing. Very noticeable. There was already a seed of suspicion there, a tiny, dormant spark of insecurity. It was the perfect name. It would create the necessary impact. It was plausible. I spent the next few days laying the final pieces of groundwork. I mentioned Cora's name once or twice in a neutral context. Cora put together that report. She did a great job, just enough to keep her name fresh in Lena's mind. The stage was set. The props were in place. My lines were rehearsed. All I had to do now was wait for my moment. The moment when the atmosphere was just right. A few nights later, it came. Lena came home from work looking tired. I had already made dinner, something simple. We ate in relative silence, the unspoken distance between us, a familiar guest at our table. Everything seemed as usual, until she took the initiative. She put her fork down, a hesitant look on her face. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. Julian, I think we need to talk. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. I looked at her, my expression carefully neutral. Inside, I was thinking. Showtime. Talk about what? I asked, my voice calm, as if I had no idea what was coming. She looked down at her plate, pushing a piece of chicken around with her fork. About us, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I've been feeling so disconnected lately. It feels like we're just roommates. Two people living in the same house. She looked up at me then, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. The desire, it feels like it's gone. The kisses feel colder. The hugs, they're like mechanical gestures. Don't you feel it too? I listened carefully, letting the silence hang in the air after her question. This was the opening. The exact pause I had been waiting for. She was looking for a reaction, for confirmation that she wasn't alone in this feeling. I was about to give it to her. I reached across the table and quietly slipped my finger into my pocket, pressing the small, discreet button on the side of the audio recorder. A tiny, almost imperceptible click. The recording had begun. I took a breath, letting it out slowly, a sigh filled with feigned regret. I dropped the first part of my script. Yeah, I said, my voice controlled, almost mournful. I've been feeling it. I've been feeling different. I looked away, as if ashamed. There's someone at work, I said, letting the words hang there. Cora, my assistant. I saw the flicker in her eyes. A spark of recognition, of validation. Nothing has happened between us, I clarified quickly, making it sound like a desperate, honest plea. I swear, it's just an internal confusion. She's been messing with my head. I don't even think she knows how I feel. I'm not even sure if it's just professional admiration or something more. I looked back at her, my expression a carefully crafted mask of guilt and turmoil. I'm sorry for sharing this, I said, my voice low. I felt like I needed to be honest. I wanted you to know. The effect was immediate and profound. It was as if I had unlocked something inside her. Her shoulders, which had been tense, visibly relaxed. Her eyes lowered, not in shame, but in something that looked like relief. In that moment, her guilt had been given permission to be shared. The silence lasted for a few seconds, but it wasn't an uncomfortable one. It was a silence filled with a dawning sense of shared conspiracy. Then, she started speaking. Her tone was low, conspiratorial. "Julian, I understand," she said softly. "I understand what you're feeling. Sometimes, these things just happen." And then came the words I had been waiting for. The words I had orchestrated this entire elaborate theater to hear. "The truth is," she began, taking a shaky breath, "I haven't been completely honest with you either." She confessed that she had been involved with Preston, her boss. "For a while now," she explained how it started. Innocent message exchanges about work that slowly bled into personal conversations. Late nights at the office working on a project, where the line between professional and personal blurred. Then the meetings became more frequent, and less about work. She said it only ever happened inside the company, always very carefully. In his office, after everyone else had gone home. She told me they were both terrified of being discovered, but that the involvement, it had become inevitable. An escape. I listened without interrupting. I let her talk, my face a mask of moderate surprise, as if this wasn't exactly what I had been expecting. I played the part of the wounded but understanding husband. I said I had noticed the distance between us, but I never imagined she was involved with anyone, much less with Preston. My feigned ignorance was the fuel for her confession. She kept talking, the words tumbling out of her now, a flood of relief. She said she had been thinking about ending it, that her feelings for Preston were already fading, that sometimes she thought it had all just been an escape from the stagnation she felt in our marriage. She said she hadn't had the courage to confess before because she thought I would never understand, that I would just be angry. But now, she said, her eyes meeting mine, a glimmer of hope in them, hearing you talk about Cora, it all seems easier. It feels like, maybe we both made mistakes. Oh. As she opened up, I observed every word, every detail, my analytical mind cataloging the confession. And the tiny device in my pocket captured everything clearly. That confession was the missing piece of the puzzle I had so patiently assembled. And the cruelest part, or perhaps the most strategic part, was that she thought we were having a moment of reconnection. She believed that by sharing our mutual transgressions, we were creating a new foundation of honesty, that perhaps we could start over, that we were forgiving each other. She had no idea that right there, in that conversation, she was sealing the end of everything. She had no idea that I had already made my decision the moment I turned on that recorder. Lena finished speaking with a long, deep exhale, as if she had just lifted a huge weight from her chest. She had hidden it for so long, and now, she believed she had finally had the courage to be honest. She was convinced that this was a moment of profound intimacy between us. Something mature, two adults dealing with their mistakes and vulnerabilities. She believed that, in some way, we were both guilty, and were now ready to try starting over. There was even a faint, hopeful smile at the corner of her mouth, the smile of someone who thinks they've survived the storm. She had no idea that the real hurricane hadn't even started yet. I let the silence sit for a few seconds, my eyes fixed on her. On the outside, anyone would think I was trying to process what I had just heard, trying to find the right words. But inside, I already knew exactly what I was going to say. I had known for weeks. I took a deep breath, as if to calm my own heart, and then I spoke. My voice was stripped of all the fake emotion from moments before. It was cold. It was flat. It contrasted sharply with the serene tone I had been using. "Lena," I said, "I need to tell you something, too." Her hopeful expression faltered slightly, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I lied. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand immediately. The words didn't compute. I continued, my voice still unnervingly calm. "I was never confused about Cora. I'm not in love with her. Nothing is going on." I paused, letting each word land like a heavy stone. "I made it all up." She froze. The faint smile died instantly. Her face was a canvas of rapidly shifting emotions. First, confusion. Then, denial. Finally, panic began to dawn in her eyes as the gears started to turn. What are you talking about?" she stammered. I delivered the final blow, almost as if I were handing her a key to a puzzle she hadn't even known she was solving. "It was just a story to make you feel safe enough to tell me what you were hiding." Then I added the last sentence. This entire conversation has been recorded. From the very first second, the silence that fell between us then was brutal. It was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She covered her mouth with her hand, a reflexive gesture, as if that could hold back the truth that was now loose in the air between us. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Her throat tightened, her trembling eyes searched mine, looking for a loophole, an argument, an explanation. A sign that this was some kind of cruel joke, but she found nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold, final resolution. There was no more room for excuses. The game was over. I stood up from the table. The movement felt slow, deliberate. I climbed the stairs, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silent house. I opened our bedroom closet, took out a suitcase, and started packing my clothes. Quickly, methodically, I chose only the essentials: shirts, pants, documents. I grabbed my wallet from the dresser, my phone, and I left without saying goodbye. I didn't even look back. I walked down the stairs and out the front door, leaving Lena in the living room, still sitting at the table, surrounded by the echo of her own confession. As I closed the door behind me, I heard her call my name, a choked, desperate sound. I heard her stumble up 2 steps of the stairs, then stop. She knew that anything said at that moment would only make things worse. And perhaps, deep down, she knew I was right. I didn't yell because I didn't need to. The truth, her truth, recorded in her own voice, spoke louder than any accusation I could ever make. I spent that night in a sterile hotel room downtown. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, the city lights painting patterns on the wall, and I listened to the recording. Once, twice, a third time. Her voice, filled with relief at her own honesty, was a chilling counterpoint to the deception it described. It was all there: the names, the places, the timeline. A perfect, undeniable confession. The next morning, I did what I needed to do. I opened my laptop. I composed 2 separate emails. I didn't use offensive words. I didn't make threats. I simply let the truth speak for itself. The first email was addressed to the personal email account of Preston's wife, an address I had found through some careful online searching months ago. The second was addressed to the desk of the president of Sterling Corp., the company where they both work. The subject line for both was simple: a conversation with my wife, Lena. The body of the email was just as concise. Attached is an audio file of a conversation recorded last night. I believe the contents are self-explanatory. The truth is here. I attached the audio file and hit send on both. Then, I closed my laptop and let the consequences unfold on their own. I didn't want scandal for the sake of scandal. I wanted justice, and that's exactly what happened. The company, concerned about its own image and potential liability, took immediate and decisive action. Both Lena and Preston were discreetly but firmly removed. Preston, who held a high-level executive position, was dismissed for gross ethical misconduct. His career at Sterling Corp., built over a decade, was dissolved in a single 20-minute meeting with the board. Lena was let go too. No warning. No chance to defend herself. The evidence was absolute. Rumors spread through the company like wildfire. No one knew the exact details of the recording, but everyone was talking about the reason behind the sudden, simultaneous firing. It became the subject of hallway conversations, silent meetings, and looks exchanged between colleagues. Their professional reputations were tarnished. There was no official statement that could undo the damage of whispered speculation. Later that day, I received a reply to one of my emails. It was from Preston's wife. The email contained a single sentence: "Thank you. I'm already handling it." I read it, closed my laptop, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It wasn't happiness or satisfaction. It was peace. The quiet, clean feeling of a complex problem finally being solved. My phone buzzed incessantly all day. Lena. She sent messages I didn't open, voicemails I didn't listen to, long texts asking to talk, saying she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me, that it had all been an emotional mistake. But I didn't respond, and it wasn't out of anger. It was out of decision. I had already heard everything I needed to hear from her, and now, I just wanted distance. What was once doubt had become certainty. What was once love had become a full stop. And even if she got on her knees, even if she swore to change, there was no more room to continue. Because I understood something with absolute clarity in that hotel room. Whoever betrays for that long, so methodically, doesn't do it on impulse, they do it by choice. And whoever chooses to deceive, every single day, builds an entire life on a foundation of lies. That marriage ended right there. At the moment she thought she was being understood, when in fact, she was being unmasked with her own voice. The divorce was swift and clinical. I gathered the documents, attached a transcript of the recording, and presented the history of a prolonged betrayal. The judge handled the case with firmness. The clarity of the evidence left no room for discussion or negotiation. I secured a favorable settlement, an unequal division of assets, granting me the larger share of the wealth we had accumulated during the marriage. Lena, facing the loss of her job, her reputation, and her emotional stability, didn't even attempt to contest it. She signed the papers with a trembling hand, her eyes avoiding mine. Her new life began in a small, rented apartment on the other side of town, hastily secured with the savings she had left. Without a steady income, without health insurance, without the network of friends she once had, many distanced themselves as the story, in its vague but damaging form, spread. Even the few who remained avoided getting involved. Her image was stained. She tried to find a new job, but at every interview, she faced the fear of being recognized. Some recruiters knew the whispers. Others directly asked about her abrupt departure from a senior position at a prestigious company. Every attempt to start over seemed to hit an invisible wall built by her own choices. I, on the other hand, started over in silence. I left the city. I rented a modest house in another state, a place where no one knew my name or my story. I enrolled in a woodworking course I had always wanted to take. Nothing luxurious, but it was enough to occupy my mind and my hands, to create new cycles. I met new people without carrying the weight of the past on my shoulders. I returned to visiting cafes, running on Sundays, breathing without the constant hum of suspicion. I didn't go around telling my story. I kept it all inside, like a wound that had healed into a scar. It no longer hurt, but it was a permanent part of me. I didn't aim to forget. I just didn't want to relive it. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Lena had tried to reconnect with Preston a few weeks after the scandal. Perhaps she was seeking some kind of support or complicity, but he didn't respond. He ignored her calls, didn't return her messages, and eventually blocked her number. He was too busy dealing with his own collapse, an acrimonious divorce, legal proceedings, and the total loss of his professional stability. To him, Lena had been a convenient distraction within the workplace, nothing worth keeping after the destruction of his life. She had been discarded. He moved on without a single look back. No apology, no explanation, nothing. What started as a hidden affair ended in absolute silence. Lena was alone, without a job, without a reputation, and without the man for whom she had risked her own merit. And it was there, in the void left from all sides, that she finally had to confront the magnitude of her mistake. Years passed. One ordinary afternoon, I was told she ran into an old coworker from Sterling Corp. They had a quick, polite conversation, careful to avoid any real depth. But as they were about to part ways, the colleague said something that Lena would never forget. "You know," the colleague said, a hint of pity in her voice, "Julian was always smarter than you thought. You underestimated the one man who truly loved you." That sentence, I heard, echoed in her mind for days. She cried alone that night. Not for the lost possessions, or the job, or the divorce. She cried for the certainty that she had destroyed the only real bond she ever had, and that there was no going back. Somewhere far away, on that same afternoon, I was having coffee with a small group of new friends from my woodworking class. I laughed at a silly joke someone told. I glanced at my phone, read some random article online. Life went on, and even though no one there knew the war I had navigated, I did. And that was enough. I didn't need to tell the story to anyone. The best response, the best victory, was always in the silence, because there are truths that, when uncovered, change everything. And some lies, no matter how well staged, no matter how carefully protected, always find their moment too.